Welcome to yet another episode of Simple Stories That Touched My Heart. Hello, listeners. My name is Vandana, and the story I bring to you today is a love story with a twist. Today's story is an English translation of a Marathi short story written by Ratnakar Matkari and translated by Vikrant Pande. The name of the story is Followed. Happy listening.
Dr. Divakar always experienced the strange feeling of being followed while driving. He kept an eye on the rearview mirror, always suspicious. He had been wrong before, but this time he was certain the man on the motorcycle was following him. Most cars turned one way or the other at the crossroads, but he drove straight and continued down a lonely stretch of road. So did the man on the motorcycle. That road was always quiet, with only a few cars heading to the hospital it led to. On this evening, he and the motorcyclist were alone. Uneasy, he remembered Saptarishi, who always rode a motorcycle. He could see in the mirror that the mysterious man was wearing a black shirt, black pants. Dr. Saptarishi always wore black, as if it were a fashion statement. God knows what Saptarishi thought of himself. He was a good-looking man, but put too much thought into his appearance, focusing on the contrast of a white coat on black. Show off. The memory of Dr. Saptarishi made Dr. Divakar uncomfortable. He had been on edge for a fortnight, jittery for no apparent reason. He reflected on the irony of a doctor being unable to determine the cause of his own discomfort. The biker was closer now and was clearly visible in the rearview mirror. Dr. Divakar sat up with a jolt. The same lean body, his hair blowing in the wind. Dr. Saptarishi? Impossible. Dr. Saptarishi had died on the operating table a fortnight ago. The two doctors had been close friends. They graduated from medical school and joined the hospital both at the same time. They were of the same age, but the corpulent and balding Dr. Divakar had a more commanding personality, while Dr. Saptarishi was the attractive, fashionable one. No one would believe that they had been classmates. Both were unmarried and would spend their free time playing cards, watching movies. They agreed on most issues, and their hobbies were similar. Days went by peacefully until Neelima Sarang arrived at the hospital. Dr. Divakar brushed off the memories and focused on the biker behind him. He wondered if he was being paranoid. After all, a lot of young men wore dark clothes, and long hair was all the rage. In fact, if Dr. Divakar's hairline hadn't receded... He checked himself. Was he trying to convince himself it wasn't Saptarishi? The man was dead. End of subject. He focused on the lonely road, snaking its way up the hill with water gleaming on one side, reflecting the dull sunlight. Unable to shake the driver, both from behind him and from his thoughts, he decided to let him overtake his car. Dr. Divakar slowed down and waited. The motorcycle did not overtake him. He remained behind the car. Neelima was a sweet girl whose poise set her apart. She had joined as a nurse and carried herself with dignity and authority, but without arrogance. She also had a sweet voice and a pretty dimpled smile, which had caught Dr. Divakar's attention. Dr. Divakar preferred to stay away from all the drama that came with affairs at the workplace, having heard enough about them through the grapevine. Instead, he and Saptarishi would amuse themselves by joking about all the doctors and nurses they deemed unattractive or incompetent. Nilima Sarang had burst his little drama-free bubble. Divakar and Saptarishi soon stopped making crass jokes about the nursing staff. Their gossip was replaced with praise for Nilima's intelligence and efficiency. They would invite her to join them for tea and coffee. She was articulate and could talk on a wide variety of subjects. She never pretended to be like one of the doctors, though, and never shirked work. Her traits made her even more attractive to Divakar, and he soon realized he was in love with her. He was unlikely to meet someone like Nilima again. Of that, he was certain. She had walked into his life, and he was not going to let the opportunity slip away. He decided to propose to her. It would be an evening he would remember for the rest of his life. Christmas Eve. The hospital was run by a Christian mission, and Christmas was celebrated with a staff party followed by a ball. There would be emergency calls, doctors' shifts, but the party and the fun would not stop. It was on such a lovely evening in the hospital's garden and under swaying lamps that Divakar was to ask Nilima to marry him. He imagined she would smile, blush, and softly say yes. Dr. Divakar put on his black jacket and pinned on a white rosebud. He was spraying perfume over his coat when the bell rang, and, pushing the door open, Dr. Saptarishi rushed in. He was, as usual, dressed nattily with a few top buttons of his shirt undone. His hair covered half his forehead, and his blue eyes were bright and radiant. "Aren't you going to the party?" Divakar asked. "Believe me, I could really use some rest and relaxation. How about a few drinks here, away from all the people we see every day?" "I know what you mean, but I should get going. Important work to do." "Forget work. It's all you ever talk about," Saptarishi said, slapping Divakar on the back. "And look at you, being all old school with that suit. Come on, let's just hang out here. I want to tell you something." Saptarishi beamed, clearly elated. "Guess what? This afternoon at lunch, I proposed to Nilima. She said yes." Divakar's world came crashing down. The road turned and the ocean disappeared behind the trees. He drove up the hill and for a moment it seemed like the biker was gone. He heard the bike before he saw it again in his mirror. Dr. Divakar accelerated. So did the biker. It was not easy to accelerate on the steep slope. He accelerated further. The bike moved faster still. It was gaining on him, even on the steep slope. The man was following him. There was no doubt about it. Divakar's pulse raced. He didn't know if he was speeding away from danger or straight towards it. The man in black was nearing the car. The purring of the motorcycle reverberated in the silence around them. He wandered aimlessly through the crowd at the Christmas party. He felt a sudden urge to return to his room and lock himself away from the world. Recovering from the initial shock, he steadied himself and stretched out his hand, putting on a fake smile. Congratulations. He was dressed up for the party, and he could not miss it. Saptarishi was with him and was almost floating with joy. There was no stopping him, the way he danced, got drunk, and blabbered constantly. Divakar stood in a corner, holding a glass and watching the others enjoy themselves. Music played, and the lanterns nodded in the wind. Everyone had put on their paper party hats, and their voices mingled in a cacophony of Christmas and New Year greetings. All Divakar could do was play along while yearning for his room. Nilima walked over and took a seat across from him. Her expression was calm, he noticed, not excited. He wondered if he was imagining that, and was simply in denial of the fact that she could be happy with another man. "Why are you sitting here alone? Not feeling well?" She sounded concerned. Divakar detected affection in her tone. If only he could have enjoyed it for the rest of his life. Gulping down his drink, Divakar blurted, without meeting her eyes, "Congratulations." "He already told you?" The dimples returned with her smile. But he looked away. Stung by the way she said he. "Good thing he did. Or else I would have proposed." He pretended to joke. "Oh, well, that would have been a tough choice," she answered with a laugh. Divakar's face lit up at her response. She got up and walked away, but his gaze lingered over her. She had given him hope. Those words, she loved him, even if not with the same intensity with which he loved her. But nevertheless, notwithstanding her feelings for Saptarishi, she would have, had he proposed, said yes. She loved both, was affectionate to both, and liked their company. Why else would she ask about his health? Nilima would have loved me if it wasn't for Saptarishi. I'm sure of it. If only Saptarishi was not around. Divakar imagined a world without Saptarishi. His path was clear. Nilima was his and his alone. The next moment he was shaken out of his reverie. What if he made Saptarishi disappear? Chah! He shook the thought out of his head. He was not a murderer. Besides, it wouldn't be easy. Troubled by such disturbing thoughts, Divakar rushed out of the party. 4 days later, Saptarishi died. He succumbed to injuries from a motorcycle accident. His motorcycle was damaged beyond recognition. It was quite clear then that the motorcycle following his car could not be Saptarishi's. Divakar tried convincing himself. And that man? How could the man be him? But the resemblance... Divakar's mind was in shambles, with all the unnerving thoughts playing in a loop over and over and over again, until his knuckles were white and a joyless grin stretched across his face. The car raced uphill with the motorcycle inching closer by the minute. The whirring of the bike sounded like a swarm of angry bees. The trees were a blur now, and the wind and bike engine buzzed in Divakar's ears as he continued to push the accelerator. The motorcycle was almost in the air. No, he would not be forgiven. He wouldn't be spared. He had to escape, even if it meant going faster and faster, and... The world went upside down, blurring, rolling faster and faster, and darkness. Even after the crash, the wheels of Dr. Divakar's upturned car continued to spin for a long time. When he opened his eyes, all he saw was a white wall. He looked down and noticed bandages wound around him, restricting his movement like blinkers on a horse. There were familiar smells and a calendar on the wall. He was at the hospital. What happened to me? A painful spasm in his back made him writhe in pain, and suddenly it all came back to him. The wind, the trees, the man on the motorcycle. How did he escape the rider's clutches? It had surely been him. How am I still alive? Divakar stared at the white wall. Nilima had fainted when she heard of Dr. Saptarishi's accident. She used to warn him against speeding, but he would not listen. He was passionate about everything he loved, whether it was Nilima or the bike or the thrill of speeding. He was on his way to the hospital at his usual fast pace when a goods truck came from the other side. As he tried to weave his way past it, the bike skidded and he fell. Luckily, he survived, but he suffered a serious head injury. He was admitted at the hospital where they worked. First, Nilima cried her heart out. After a while, the nurse in her took charge. She was determined to save his life. An emergency operation, a brain surgery, was to be performed on Saptarishi. When he looked at her before going to the operating theatre, tears flowed down her cheeks. She smiled, holding his hand gently, before he was wheeled away for the procedure. Divikar said, looking at Nilima, "Please, I know you're capable and that you love him, but you're emotionally compromised right now. Please send me another nurse." The operation theatre was ready to receive the patient. It was to be performed by Dr. Singhani, who was reputed in the field and had performed many such operations. Dr. Divikar was to assist him. The only one sitting outside was Nilima. She counted every minute and wished she could be inside, but she had full faith in Divikar. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the doors of the operating theatre opened. Dr. Singhani came out, followed by Dr. Divikar. They all walked away without even glancing at her. For a moment, she stood still, not knowing what to do. Then it dawned on her. Saptarishi had died on the operating table. The silence around Divikar was shattered by Nilima, who walked in wearing her nurse's uniform. No one wanted to speak. They both looked at each other, their eyes moist. She asked in a soft voice, "Are you feeling better?" Dr. Divikar thanked his stars that he had survived and was able to hear her voice. It was full of concern and love. He smiled. She continued, "I'm surprised. You drive so carefully. What happened today?" He wanted to tell her everything, that Saptarishi had chased him to the brink of death. But he checked himself. Even if she believed him, she wouldn't understand Saptarishi's motive. Divikar was silent. Nilima said, staring vacantly, "It's like I'm in a jinx. First that accident and now you." A small hope sprung in Divikar's mind. She was worried about him. She was concerned. He would propose to her soon, but he would have to be sensitive about it. He had to let her grieve. There was no doubt in his mind that she would be his, now that Saptarishi was no more. Then it dawned on him. Saptarishi must have chased him because he knew what he was planning to do. Though dead, that man was still jealous. The very idea terrified him. There was nothing to stop the dead man from trying to kill him again. Sooner or later, Divikar's luck would run out. "We need to perform a small operation on your spine," Nilima announced. "Dr. Gadkari, the surgeon, should be in by noon. Don't worry." At noon, Divikar was wheeled into surgery. Divikar asked that Nilima be present for the procedure. He felt comfortable knowing she would be close. A silence fell over the room. The only thing Divikar could hear was the ticking of the clock and the breathing of those present. There had been a similar silence then, just the sound of the clock and their breathing. He lay on the table, the man who had been his best friend, the one Nilima was to wed. Surgeon Singhani, and a serious expression as he snapped on his gloves, frowning over his mask. The ticking of the clock. Lying there, Saptarishi looked so different it was hard to imagine a smile on that once cheerful face. Silence. Divikar lay on his table and his mind raced, the light above and the darkness around. Why am I scared? What of? The man on the motorcycle? He must have vanished when my car finally crashed. But it was surely him, waiting to take my life. Surgeon Gadkari indicated for the anesthetist to begin. Divikar stared at the anesthetist because he noticed it. The resemblance. the blue eyes, the black collar beneath the white gown. It was Saptarishi. "He's going to kill me! Help! Help!" he screamed. "He's Saptarishi. He wants to kill me because I killed him. I murdered him. I gave him an overdose of anesthesia and now he wants revenge." A deep, cold silence followed. It was a quiet, sad evening when Divakar regained consciousness. Someone was sitting near his pillow. It was not Neelima. It was not Saptarishi. It was someone else, a young man who resembled Saptarishi. A nurse stood close to them. The nurse came closer as he opened his eyes. Pointing at the young man, she said, "Meet Dr. Ashtikar. He joined in place of Dr. Saptarishi." Divakar noticed that Ashtikar was wearing a black shirt over dark trousers. "He joined this morning. He was late and was rushing over to the hospital when he saw you speeding and finally crashing. He brought you in." Dr. Ashtikar smiled. "Now that she's got the introductions covered, I thought I'd reassure you that I am not Dr. Saptarishi, and I definitely didn't give you an overdose." Divakar smiled. "Of course, your admission of guilt has raised a lot of questions. Neelima was planning to go to the police, but I don't think the hospital will allow her to do that. The management needs to take into account the reputation of the hospital. The whole episode is going to be devastating for you, of course, but at the moment, you need all your strength to recover." Divakar wondered how it would help even if he were to recover. It was clear that Neelima would not want to see him ever again. He would be labelled a murderer. The nurse walked away. "I did not give you an overdose. If I wanted to kill you, I could have hit you on the head while you were still there in the wreckage. No one would have suspected." His next words pierced Divakar's heart. "May you live long to repent your sins." Divakar listened to Ashtikar, squirming all the while. He was destined to suffer for the rest of his life. "Remember your oath. As a doctor, you must do no harm. I kept you alive, doctor, for the same reason," Ashtikar said as he laughed out loud. Divakar barely heard him. Instead, he was staring at his face. "By the way, you were right back there. The real Ashtikar is at home. Luckily, no one has seen him before, so the switch was easy, which is lucky since I haven't quite figured out how to change form." Saptarishi guffawed. "Live and let live, doctor, for the dead are quite terrifying." With that, Saptarishi faded into thin air, but his laughter lingered on.
Thank you for joining me for this charming story. I do hope you enjoyed my version of it. If you did, do consider following the podcast for regular updates. Till the next episode, coming up soon, goodbye and stay inspired.